Welcome to the History in a Bottle podcast, the podcast that tries to take complex and advanced history and make it a little bit more manageable. Note that History in a Bottle is a unscripted and mostly unedited podcast, so you're going to see me sometimes stumble over my words and sometimes go off a little bit, all on small little tangents. That's just part of the experience. Today's topic is a dark topic. It's a fairly heavy topic, and viewer discretion is advised. This episode's subject is the Armenian Genocide. Now, there is no strict definition for the Armenian Genocide as to when it really began. Scholarly consensus puts it at the 24th of April 1915, though there were certainly massacres that were happening before then. And going by the loosest possible definition, you could even say it stretched on for as long as between 1894 and 1920. For the purpose of this episode, we will start by looking at the background and the causes of this horrific tragedy, as well as the events themselves and their aftermath. To really understand the Armenian Genocide, you have to go back to the 1800s, to 1894 through 1897. There was a series of massacres authorized by the then Sultan Abdul Hamid II. These are known as the Hamidian massacres. About 200,000 Armenians were killed, between 100,000 and 300,000. These provoked outrage in the Western community, though obviously not enough to really have a major impact on the Ottomans' policy towards Armenians. In fact, all it did was later on down the line convince the ruling establishment that the Armenians would be seeking revenge for the massacres in the 1890s. In 1909, there was a coup by a group known as the CUP, or the Young Turks. Sorry, not the CUP. The Young Turks were a organization which was composed mostly of young, not students per se, but younger individuals who had a greater sense of nationalism, a greater sense of pan-Turkic ideals. They wanted to unite the Turkic peoples, which would include, of course, those in Turkey, but also Turkmens from Turkmenistan, and those in that steppe region across the Caspian Sea. And it was in the wake of a counter coup by the or an attempted counter coup that would signal the Adana massacres of 1909, which killed a further 20,000 Armenians. And by 1914, there were about 2.2 million Armenians living in the Turkish Empire. We don't know exactly how many Armenians were living in the Russian Empire, as the wider Armenian region, known as Greater Armenia, was split between these two. In 1914, a small event occurred that we now call the start of World War I. might have heard of it before. I'm not sure. But World War I started, and Turkey and Russia were on opposite sides of the war. This led to the beginning of conflict between them in the Caucasus region. Specifically, the battle most important here is Sarikamish, which lasted between December 22nd, 1914 to January 17th, 1915, wherein 70,000 Russian and Armenian soldiers defeated a force of 100,000 Turks. This only furthered the rhetoric that the Armenians were going to stab Turkey in the back, and that they were planning on betraying them, and that they were going to defect as soon as the Russians came within Turkish lands. There was also the fact that Turkey had recently lost a series of wars in the Balkans to mostly Christian Serbs and Krauts, and they were looking for a scapegoat on which they could take out their anger. So this started with the Von dilemma. The Von dilemma was around April 19th, 1915, the Armenians of Von. There had also been like sporadic killings between the start of the Battle of Sarikamish and the beginning of the defense of Von, where sporadic killings of about between 20 and 100 Armenians per village were massacred. But at this point, it was they went to the city of Van in modern day Turkey, which was had a far larger Armenian population back in 1915, where they basically said, lay down your arms or we're going to attack you. And they were faced with a dilemma. If they lay down their arms, they were going to be murdered. If they did not lay down their arms, they would be giving them pretext to justify the massacring that would soon follow. They decided eventually that they were going to mount an armed defense, the defense of Van, in which 1,500 Armenians successfully defended against a force of 5,000 Turks. However, 55,000 Armenians were killed. That lasted between April 19th to May 17th, 1915. The Genocide Remembrance Day, the day that is considered the start of the Armenian Genocide, would be April 24th, as that is when the intellectuals, those who were learned, living in Constantinople, it was Constantinople at the time, modern-day Istanbul, were dismissed, which either means they were killed or deported. Talat Pasha, one of the three pashas, the three rulers of the Ottoman Empire at the time, said this in a May 4th address to a German newspaper. "We have been blamed for not making a distinction between guilty and innocent Armenians. To do so was impossible. Because of the nature of things, one who is still innocent today could be guilty tomorrow. The concern for the safety of Turkey simply had to silence all other concerns. Our actions were determined by national and historical necessity." Musadah is a small town near to the coast of southern Turkey. Musadah held out between the 21st of July to the 12th of September, 1915. 600 fighters held out against 19,000 Turkish troops, whilst being supported by the French Navy, until the French Navy was able to evacuate them, saving over 4,000 civilians. Miraculously, only 18 of the 600 fighters were killed. This became the basis for a book, 40 Days at Musadah, by Franz Werfel, an Austrian Jew, warning against the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. The main method of execution was deportation. They would gather up Armenians and march them through the desert, giving them not enough ample resources to actually survive the march, and if they stopped, they would be shot. Most of the executions were not merely attacking villages and killing them. They would not do that most of the time. Only if the villagers put up resistance would they do that. Instead, they would march into a village, separate the men from the women, force the men to march out and dig a mass grave. Then they would kill the men, force them into the mass grave, the bodies, and cover it over. Meanwhile, we'll get to what they did with the women and children. The Turkish government appointed imams to justify the religious pretext for the massacres, and those who killed an Armenian were entitled to 1/3 of the property of the Armenian that they killed. Women and children were oftentimes spared, assuming they survived the marches, of course, if they were marched. They would be forced to convert to Islam, and the women were sold into sexual slavery or raped by the soldiers themselves. And the children were separated from their mothers and sold to the highest bidder to be adopted children. The women, having really no other choice, would often commit suicide, as it was the only way out of the cycle of abuse they would be subjected to. Turkey was losing the war. They were being pushed up out of Egypt and up through the Levant. This meant that just merely killing them in the way that they had been before, which was single massacres, was not nearly as effective. They needed a way to round up and eradicate the Armenians faster. To do this, they began to build concentration camps. The largest of these extermination camps was Deir ez-Zor. Quite often, historians and journalists soundly compare Deir ez-Zor with Auschwitz, saying that Deir ez-Zor is the Auschwitz of the Armenians. I think that the chronology forces us to formulate the facts in a reverse way. Auschwitz is the Deir ez-Zor of the Jews. That was said by Serge Sargsyan, the former president of Armenia. 150,000 were killed in the Deir ez-Zor camp alone. A further 80,000 were killed in the Reiz al-Ain camps. However, there is a moment of human kindness which occurred in these camps. One Mayor Haj Fidel al-Boud showed great kindness in procuring greater resources and offering rest and respite to many of the detainees who testified on behalf of the mayor when the French liberated the camps. The Armenians who were deported to the Levant were not eradicated, but were instead forced to work on behalf of the war effort. This would mean building fortifications or creating military equipment. This was all being done under the third Pasha, Kemal Pasha. By the end of the war, between 1.2 and 1.5 million Armenians were killed. The Allied powers gave the survivors the land of the First Armenian Republic. but the Armenian Republic did not last long. It was invaded by Turkey in 1920 and subsequently invaded by the Soviet Union on the 24th of September, 1920. It held out until the 29th of November, but was eventually defeated by both of the invading powers. It was partitioned between the Republic of Turkey and the Soviet Union, and most of the surviving Armenians in Western Armenia either fled to the Soviet Union or fled across the sea. During this invasion, a further 300,000 civilian lives were lost. There were two undertakings which were performed after 1918 up until about 1923. The first was the Vor Bahavach, or the Gathering of the Orphans, where the stolen children and the children of raped Armenian women were attempted to be reclaimed. This meant abandoning the traditional patrilineal descendancy for Armenians and classifying the children of those Armenian women who were Islamicized and raped, classifying them as Armenians. The second was Nemesis Gortsoghutiun, or Operation Nemesis. Named after the Greek goddess of vengeance, Operation Nemesis was aimed at punishing those responsible for the Armenian Genocide, as no formal trial or formal punishment was ever given to them. Talat Pasha was assassinated by Soghomon Tahrilian outside a Berlin hotel in March 1921. Soghomon was put on trial, but was acquitted by a sympathetic jury. Enver Pasha joined the Basmachi rebellion against the Bolsheviks and fought at Dushanbe. Notably, he fought against a Bashkir cavalry unit under the command of an Armenian, Yakov Melkumov, born Hakob Melkumian. It is contested whether or not he died from machine gun fire or whether or not Melkumov personally killed him by decapitating him with his saber. Regardless, of the original 2.2 million Armenians alive in the Ottoman Empire in 1914, less than 400,000 remained. Many of the survivors fled, mostly to Russia, America, and France. In the next few years, a few attempts were made to deny the genocide, but rather to justify it, as can be seen in the following. Whatever has befallen the non-Muslim elements living in our country, it is the result of the policies of separatism they pursued in a savage manner, when they allowed themselves to be made tools of foreign intrigues and abused their privileges. There are probably many reasons and excuses for the undesired events that have taken place in Turkey, and I want to definitely say that these events are on a level far removed from the many forms of oppression which are committed in the states of Europe without any excuse. From Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. According to Arakian Zucher, this has all of the